Brethren, happy Sabbath, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to the Friday night Sabbath Eve Bible study for this 8th day of the 5th month on God's holy sacred calendar. It's the first day of August 2025 on that pagan Roman calendar. I hope all of you had a good week. You know, God gave us 6 days to work and get our work done, and normally we get it done, 8 hours? Sometimes some places where you work, they have 10-hour shifts now, and you work 4 days instead of 10-hour shifts instead of 5 days a week. So you have 2 or 3 days off. Beside the Sabbath, you have 1 or 2 other days off from work. Well, with one employer. Now, sometimes people work more than one job and to make ends meet and keep expenses covered. I hope all of you had a good week of work and that you're looking forward to the Sabbath now. And you fellows in New York that are having a problem with somebody wanting to take your cell phone away that was paying for it for you, well, those things happen. God does expect us to, he does say, if you don't work, you don't eat. And so there is the principle of we have to take care of ourselves. We have to carry our own burden. And, we have a generation that's been spoiled, that thinks it's even called an entitled generation. And for some of you, that's going to require some unlearning, because God's way is for us to, during those 6 days he made for work, to work. Now, as I said all that, I've taken some extra work on, and I wound up working till 3:30 this morning. I got 5 hours of sleep, and I've got a big box of chocolate here on my desk that's keeping me going. All right, we've got something good for us tonight. This is a Bible study, and I want to ask you a question. Some months ago, we played a telecast by God's end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong, in which he made a prediction that he said, some of you won't believe until it happens. Do you remember what that was? And do you now believe, now that those things he predicted are happening all around us? And in the news right now, for the last couple of weeks, and it's been in the news, frankly, for weeks and weeks and months and even years, but in a small way. But going back more than a decade, when in Israel they made preparations for reinstituting the daily sacrifice. And as God's end-time apostle put it, they would not actually need a third temple in order to reinstitute the daily sacrifice. And how long ago has it been now? Maybe 12, 14 years ago. The Jewish community built a portable altar, about 10,000 pounds, plus another couple of thousand pounds for the ramp that leads up to the altar, on which they would lead a live animal up the ramp, and then once it gets to the top, they lay it down and slit its throat and make it a sacrifice. They actually hauled that portable ramp out in front of the Wailing Wall. And very interesting when they did that, because some of you brethren may remember when Mr. Armstrong said they could set up an altar in front of the Wailing Wall to take care of that prophecy God made about the daily sacrifice being stopped. It has to be restarted again first. And Mr. Armstrong pointed out, hey, they could very simply just do an altar in front of the Wailing Wall. Now, some of you took that as if that were the bottom line, the what's the way to say that? As if that were the cat's meow, that were going to be the way it's going to happen. Mr. Armstrong was only saying that's the bare minimum. All you would need is the bare minimum in order to reinstitute that daily sacrifice. He didn't say outright the day that the bare minimum would be the way it's going to be done. If the Jewish people go above and beyond, which they definitely, as many of you know, have seen, they have a tendency to do, if they were to go above and beyond just making an altar, which they've already wheeled to the Wailing Wall, but the Israeli government, that we hadn't had the last Great Day attack of 2023 at that time, and the Israeli government made them take that thing away, get that thing out of there, because you're going to stir up a ruckus with what's called the Palestinian people. With really you're going to stir up a ruckus with the Ishmaelites, with the descendants of Ishmael, which by birth are not Islamites. You know, a Muslim is one who selects the Islamic religion, just like a Catholic is one who selects the Catholic religion. A Protestant is a person that elects a Protestant religion. Nobody forces you to do that, by the way. And now, listen, I did respond to the American Civil Liberties Union, ACL, U. They are fighting for the sake of professing Christians in Syria and other places where the Islamic radicals, as they call them, have been killing these Christians, these professing Christians. And, you know, Mr. Armstrong was in favor when we were in trouble with the state of California. He was in favor of support from other church organizations for the sake of the freedom of religion, which God allows. And, you know, in one way, brethren, when you think about it, those of you who have been called to the Church of God for the Philadelphia era, which we're still in, by the way, that's a lie that you're being told by ministers who say, well, we're now in the Laodicean era. And some of you know Mr. Armstrong taught that the Laodicean era as an era will not formally begin until after those who are accounted worthy are taken to their place of refuge, nourishment, safety, final training. Now, it's after that the Laodicean era begins. And Mr. Armstrong said when that era begins when the fifth seal Great Tribulation commences. Now, if I were you, and I was regularly seeing some minister who's telling the congregation where you go that we're now in the Laodicean era, or they broadcast that on their website, which, by the way, all of the Vanity Plate Church of God groups, somewhere on their website, they have said we are in the Laodicean era. You know, why, brethren, those of you who know the difference and who heard Mr. Armstrong, why aren't you challenging them on this? Maybe you have, and maybe you are aware that their response is, because I've challenged a number of my friends who went to college with me, who went into the ministry. I've challenged them on that. One who even worked closely with Mr. Armstrong. And they would say things like, well, Mr. Armstrong died. And I would say right back to them, well, so did the Apostle John and, the gospel writers. They all died, and all the apostles died. And, Peter and Paul, they had epistles. And in one sense, even Christ died, even though he's alive again at God's right hand, but the gospel writers are not. The apostles are not alive, and a lot of the Bible was written by their hands. So that argument that, well, Mr. Armstrong died is like them saying, well, therefore we can change all of the doctrine in the church. Well, they're forgetting several things. One, only an apostle can set doctrine in the church. That's one. Another factor is the doctrine that Mr. Armstrong set in the church. He always backed it up with the Bible. Mr. Armstrong encouraged us, did he not? As the Bible says, as Christ said in the Bible, prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. Well, Mr. Armstrong proved when the Laodicean era would begin, and he did it from the Bible. Were you listening? And if you were, why don't you stand up against those ministers who say, well, we're in the Laodicean era now? And have you asked them, well, why are you saying that? Now, because they didn't really want to talk to me about that subject, when I confronted one, he just told me, Steve, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, which I thought was very interesting. If water compares to God's Holy Spirit and truth, in other words, you can lead a guy to the truth, but if he don't want to see it, you can't make him see it. He's going to keep the blinders on. And so he tells you that, I don't want this truth right now. I had another guy that's minister over a certain group one time when I was asking him questions to help lead him to see that he maybe shouldn't have that group that he has. But he recognized I was going somewhere with that conversation we were having, and he said, I don't want to talk about that now, maybe a couple of years from now. Oh, yeah. A couple of years from now, And then a couple of years from now, it'll be a couple of years more, and then a couple of years more, and then, you'll never want to talk about it. So what do? You can't make them drink. You can lead them there. If they don't want to drink, if they don't want the truth, they're not going to have it. But that doesn't mean you can't challenge a minister. Now, you need to always be careful how you do it and be polite. And remember, you are in a position under an ordained minister, even if they're doing wrong. Position-wise, they're still over you. And as a lay member, you're told not to correct a minister by yourself, but bring one or two others, and then to do it with great, I guess the right word would be meekness, because the words are, I'll look them up for you by next Sabbath. I'll try to look that up. You're not to bring a railing accusation against a minister. And even though they might deserve it with preaching that we're in an era now that members of that era are told that they have to give their lives in martyrdom if they want to make it into God's kingdom. And they have to endure martyrdom and be hot and not compromise on that. And then they prove that they've turned from lukewarmness to being real hot, maybe even hot on fire being burned at the stake, or the symbolism of what being burned in the stake means, being killed in some way to be a martyr, whether they take your head off on a guillotine or split you in half or all that kind of thing. One of our instructors at Ambassador College used to go through some of the most grotesque and gruesome illustrations of what might happen to people during the Great Tribulation. Well, that should have caused, if you were a student at that time and hearing that should have caused your antennas to go way up and say, hey, man, I want to avoid that like the plague, because I might chicken out if they're going to do all that kind of mean stuff to people. I'd certainly try to run away. They're going to catch me and then me be screaming and hollering, don't do that to me. Well, bend down your knee bow to the image of the beast, or work on the Sabbath. You say no, they're going to martyr you. You say yes, you've taken the mark of the beast, and then you're going to suffer the year-long day of the Lord, with God pouring out his wrath, and you're not going to be and if you were called to the first resurrection, you blew it. You're not going to make the first resurrection, and you're not going to make the second, because if you're called to the first, you just eliminated your second resurrection option. So now all you've got as an option is third resurrection, and that ain't too pretty. A lot better is to do what you need to do now, would it not be, brethren, so that you can be accounted worthy to escape. We can see